This is The Morning, and I'm Steve Schmidt. And this afternoon, I'm pleased to bring a conversation with you to a conversation with Terry Virts. Terry Virts is a candidate for the United States Senate from the great state of Texas. He's a retired Air Force colonel, a veteran NASA astronaut, and the retired commander of the International Space Station, running as a Democrat in Texas. Tell me about the model of the space shuttle over your shoulder. You did not command a space shuttle mission, but you were the pilot of the space shuttle.
That's right. This is Endeavour, and it's got you probably can't see it. It's got the signatures of all my crewmates on there. They're starting to fade, but I flew. I was a F-16 pilot and test pilot, and I flew on STS-130 as Endeavour's pilot. It was the last assembly flight of the International Space Station. So we finished building the ISS, and it was awesome. It was the honor of a lifetime. Installed a module called the Cupola, which is this big 7-windowed module, and also Node 3, which is a living module. So the Cupola is every astronaut's favorite place on the ISS.
We're going to get into that, but what was it like to fly the space shuttle? And what does it mean to fly the space shuttle? So were your hands on the stick from space, flying it all the way back down to when it landed?
Yeah, that was the best part of having the privilege of flying on the space shuttle, is you could actually fly it. I was a test pilot. I like grabbing the stick and controlling it. During launch, we could, and I practiced flying it manually, but normally you don't want to do that because the computer is a lot better than humans are. So the computer flew ours automatically. Once we got in space, I actually grabbed the controls and flew a maneuver. I flew around the space station. So, manually flying it was really cool. Flying in space is very different than flying in air. And there's a lot of we could talk about rendezvous and orbital mechanics if you want. And then coming back, the computer flies it most of the way, but I actually grabbed the stick and flew it in the air before landing. And then I handed it over to George Zamko, my commander, and he actually did the landing. But it was a rocket, it was a spaceship, and then it was an airplane. So amazing vehicle. We're never going to have anything like that again, I don't think.
And how much time did you spend in space when you counted all up?
So my first flight was about 2 weeks. We landed on flight day 15. And then my second flight was 200 days. We landed on flight day 201. So if you add it all up, it was about 7 months, a little over 7 months.
In space?
In outer space, outside of the atmosphere, flying around Earth in orbit.
And now, as the crowd is starting to build a little bit, you are a candidate in Texas, where Democrats, correct me if I'm wrong, have not won a statewide election, I think, in 30 years. And you're running to be in a race as the Democratic candidate for John Cornyn's seat, though personally, I don't think John Cornyn is going to be the candidate. And so let me just ask you straight up, what's wrong with you? Right? What's wrong with you? Running for the U.S. Senate. What's going on? Why are you doing this?
Yeah, I joked that I lost a bet and had to run. 1994, the great Ann Richards, Don't Mess with Texas, was our governor. Pearl Jam was at the top of the charts. That's the last time a Democrat won here in Texas. But I've spent my whole career serving. When I was 17, I went to the Air Force Academy, spent over 30 years in the Air Force. My oath there was to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I still take that very strongly. Even though I retired from the Air Force years ago, I still take that oath seriously. And what I see happening today is crazy and it's evil. And the last couple of elections, I supported folks, with my social media, or I did some speaking on a couple different candidates' behalfs. I can't stand to just sit around and do nothing. So this is my turn to give back. There's a Bible verse: to those who much has been given, much will be expected. And I feel like I've been given a lot by this country. I've had the opportunity to fly F-16s and to fly space shuttles. And so this is my chance to give back. Unless we do something different, like you said, we're not going to win as Democrats. So the Democratic Party needs to have a wake up moment. We would say we need to have a debriefing, right? As a fighter pilot or as an astronaut, you need to debrief what went wrong so you can move forward.
So we live in a moment right now. If you listen to a lot of the geniuses in Washington, D.C., I'm looking at something that should not be. You are a graduate of the Air Force Academy. You look like a white guy to me. You're an Air Force colonel. You're a veteran astronaut. And lo and behold, like John Glenn, you're a Democrat. Why are you a Democrat?
I got asked that a few weeks ago, and it was a surprising question. I'd never been asked that before. And I thought about values. I value people, serving people. I did a video today about my faith as a Christian, and I think I'm a Democrat because I'm a Christian, because I believe in things like do unto others as you'd have them do unto yourself. Treat others the way you want to be treated, and serve the least of these, not the most of these. And that's the Democrats I know here in Texas are awesome. They want to govern. They want to get stuff done. They want to fix the flooding problem that we have here on the coast, obviously, that we have in Central Texas. They want to get people health care. They want to actually do practical things to help people out. And I think the Democratic Party nationally needs to follow the Texas model. Come learn from us. The other thing, Steve, there's a saying in the military: you go to war with the army you have, and the army we have in America is Republicans and Democrats. We're going to pick congressmen, senators, presidents who are either Republican or Democrat. That's just the reality that we have today. So you have to pick a side, and the Republican side is lost its way. You used to work for Republicans. That party's long gone, obviously. And the Democratic Party, here in Texas, there's a lot of awesome Democrats, and I guess that's why I'm a Democrat.
So you made this jump into politics, and you're going out now and competing in really a process that is 2 elections. You are auditioning, if you will, for the privilege to be up against the MAGA candidate in those finals. As like we just talked about, it's been a very long time since the confetti was coming down on election night on a statewide race with a Democratic candidate in Texas. And one of the things you're trying to do, I know, is to set about changing that. And I'll give you a lot of credit, because you went out and you said something that I think is deeply true, but like not a lot of your peers have had the guts to say. What you've said, unless I've heard it wrong, is that under no circumstance, what you said was that the first vote a new senator takes is for their party's leaders, and under no circumstance would you vote for Chuck Schumer to remain as the leader of the Democratic Party. And you also said, as I was getting ready for this, that the senator from Texas ought not to work functionally for the senator from New York, which seems like common sense, but is a revelation in these days. And so I just wanted to ask you about that. Is that right, that you would not support Schumer to be the Senate leader, and that too, broadly speaking, you are pretty critical of the team that has lost 2 elections over the last 10 years to Donald Trump?
Absolutely. We need new leadership. We love football here in Texas. So if you're an NFL team and you're going 4-12 and you're losing for 30 years, you need a new leader. We just lost the most winnable election in our history. We lost it to somebody who everybody knows is a liar. Voters know that Donald Trump is a liar. They know all of his problems, and yet they still trusted him more than they trusted Democrats. I just had breakfast with one of our leaders here in Austin, in the state Democratic Party, and he was like, Terry, I just got new polling data. We're at 24% popularity. We have to change. A bunch of poll numbers came out yesterday I was looking at. Donald Trump is unpopular. Americans don't like most of what Trump stands for on every issue, but they like Democrats even worse. And I was just in D.C. recently, Steve, a couple months ago, and the vibe at the National Democratic Party level, which is very different than Texas Democrats. These are not Texas Democrats. The National Democratic Party level thinks two things. We can't win the Senate, so let's raise a lot of money in Texas and force Republicans to spend money here, but we're going to lose. That's what they think. They're wrong. And the other thing is, we're going to pick up some House seats because Trump is going to be a disaster and the opposing party always picks up House seats, so we'll get the House majority back. It's not let's change. It's not let's listen to voters. It's not let's give voters what they want, which I think is growing the middle class and focusing on middle class issues. It's we're going to win the House, and if we win the House, they'll pat themselves on the back and talk about how great they are. That needs to change. That's a fatalistic. That's not a leader that I want to follow. And I think we have great people in the Democratic Party. Alyssa Slotkin, Ruben Gallego, Cory Booker, Mark Kelly. I could go on and on and on. There's some really great Democrats out there. It's time for them to lead. To your point, Schumer's been in office for 50 years. 50 years is too long. It's time for new leadership.
What is it that you're going to say to Texas Democrats over the course of this primary election about why you?
Yeah, that's a great question because I'm not a politician, and Texas Democrats don't know me as a politician. The point I'm going to make is number one, we have to win. We can give speeches on the House, Senate, and we can send out mean tweets and we can do whatever. That's not resistance. Resistance is winning. We have to get to 51 senators. We need to win Texas if we're going to get to 51 in the Senate. And the real question, there's one question for Democrats here in Texas. Who do we want on the ballot next November? Do we want the same guy that just lost? He's running again. Do we want to try the same thing again? We haven't won here in 30 years by running kind of traditional Democratic politicians. Or do we want to run somebody different? And it's not like personally I'm some great person or candidate, but my background's really unique. As a fighter pilot, as a test pilot, and as an astronaut, I have a perspective. And my way of focusing on things is to get the mission done, is to just let's get the mission done. Let's do good for the people of Texas and not let's be a politician who's just on one side or the other bashing the other guys. So the real question, Steve, and it's one question. Who do you want on the ballot next November? Who is John Cornyn or probably Ken Paxton going to worry about more? Another traditional Democratic politician who just lost, or somebody with my background?
So for people that are watching, Ken Paxton is the extremely corrupt attorney general in the state of Texas who was impeached, barely survived the process, and was impeached by a Republican legislature. He's going through a high-profile divorce right now. His wife, who I think is a state senator, has filed for divorce on biblical grounds. It's a whole spectacle that's playing out. But honest to God, I mean this. If it was a type of Olympics and you were looking for the obvious gold medal candidate in a competition of the worst, and you look at that MAGA Senate, teeming with scumbags, in my view, MAGA scumbags. You have some of the worst of the worst. A guy like a Ted Cruz, dishonest, self-interested. And what you have to appreciate about Ken Paxton is the moment he got there, right? In a den of thieves, he's the worst guy there. right? He's the Usain Bolt, right, of crookedness, right? Takes the place down another entire notch. He's awful, and he's going to beat John Cornyn in the primary. In my view, I don't think Cornyn has a prayer. And so the Democratic race is about who's going to be the candidate who's in the toughest, right? Who gives Ken Paxton the toughest race, who can beat Ken Paxton. And so when you think about this, what is it that you're going to say from the west of the state in El Paso, El Paso, all the way across to Shreveport, from the Panhandle to North Texas, right on down to the southern tip? What is it that you're going to say to Texas voters that is different than what they've heard over the last couple of years?
Yeah. So my focus, Steve, is going to be on one thing: growing the middle class. I came from a middle class background. I had the opportunity to go to good public schools. Those types of middle class issues are going to be my focus. Now, Texas is a big place, as you know. If it was a nation, we'd have the 8th largest economy in the world. We're very proud of that. It's a big state. It's a giant state. The issues that affect the Permian Basin and the Eagle Ford Basin are oil and gas issues. The issues that affect ranchers and agriculture are the Ogallala Aquifer is drying up. The issues that affect Houston are logistics, medical, space, energy. So there's a lot of different issues in Texas, and I want to address them all. I want to focus on what Texas voters need and not what the folks in Washington, D.C. need. But I always want to bring it back to the middle class. And Democrats have such a terrible brand. And there's a lot of people that just would never vote for a Democrat because all they ever hear is that, we're left-wing Marxists, we're radical communists and stuff. I can't wait for all these ads that Paxton is going to make about me. But I'm going to go out and talk to people and meet them where they're at. I'm not just going to stay on MSNBC. I got a call from Fox News about 15 minutes ago. They wanted me on right now. I said, no, I got to talk to Steve Schmidt. I can't go on Fox News. I'm going to go on Fox News. I'm going to go on AM talk radio. You talk about Ken Paxton. That's who he is. He's an AM talk radio guy. He never did anything interesting in his life. He's good at talking loud and bloviating. But I'm going to go on those shows. They're going to call me a radical Marxist. I'm going to be like, what are you talking about? I joined the Air Force to defend Europe from communism. Literally, that's why I joined the Air Force. So we Democrats have to get out there and talk to people where they're at. Because as you know, if you're in your little information ecosystem, you're never going to hear anything other than what you're listening to. So our duty as Democrats is to go talk to the people in Midland. I'm going to Midland here in a few weeks and kind of meet them where they're at.
Talk to me about the concept of duty. What does that word mean to you?
Well, we had to learn a lot of quotes about that. Duty, then, is the sublimest word in the English language. That was a quote we had to learn at the Air Force Academy. Duty is, well, with respect to the country, it's ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. As Americans, we've been given a lot. And by the way, as Democrats, we need to take back patriotism. Republicans don't have patriotism. They're actually very anti-patriotic. Democrats need to be patriotic. I love my country. I am blessed to live in this most amazing nation in human history. So I'm very patriotic. I'm very thankful. And my duty is to serve the country. Now, that might be raising a good family and working hard and just contributing to society. That's a huge contribution that's kind of your duty. My duty as a man was to protect my family and provide for my family. But I've been given a lot. As an Air Force F-16 pilot and as an astronaut. So I think there's going to be a lot more expected of me. And in this case, it's running for Senate because I see the disaster, like to your point, of what Ken Paxton is going to be. And I see a Democratic Party that can't get out of its own way and can't put forward a candidate that can actually beat them. So this is where my duty at this moment in my life is to jump in the battle. And running for office is not necessarily the most fun thing that you could possibly do. You've seen it up close a lot more than I have. But it's a duty, and at the end of the day, I think everybody listening to this who's an American, we all owe a lot to our country, and we should think about how we can give back to that. It might be working as a volunteer at polls, helping people vote. Might be working at your church or serving at a soup kitchen or whatever it is. But we should all think about how we can give back, because this country's given all of us a lot.
I enjoy reading these old Life magazines behind me, and I usually don't bring visual aids to this, but I wanna hold this one up.
Yeah.
That's a very famous Life magazine. And the men on that, of course, are the original 7 astronauts, of whom you were destined to join in their ranks as it expands. And so, did you always want to be an astronaut since you were a little kid? And I asked that because right before we were on, you were talking to me about this obligation you feel around the American dream, that it was a lived experience for you, and it's something that's fading to dark for a lot of people by lived experience that you believe in. And so I wanted to ask you about, for you, what was it like in that moment that you got accepted? How did you get accepted? How do you find out that, hey, you're going to be an astronaut?
Yeah, it was awesome. When I was the first book I remember reading, when you're a little kid, you get those cardboard books with one line per page. And I was reading that to my granddaughter, a different book last night. It was about astronauts. And I can remember this Apollo book. It was black and white. In my mind, it was about the moon. And I thought, well, that would be cool. I'm going to go to the moon. So I grew up I had a poster of the space shuttle on my wall when I was a boy. I had a poster of the old red, white, and blue YF-16 on my wall. When I was 13, a friend said, hey, you should read The Right Stuff. So I read Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff, the book. The movie, by the way, is spectacular. And it talked about how those guys had been fighter pilots and then test pilots and astronauts. And I didn't know what to do. My mom was a secretary. My parents were divorced. She never graduated from high school. Grew up in poverty, and my dad never went to college. So I was the first person in my immediate family to go to college. And I followed that Right Stuff path, flew F-16s, test pilot, and I was at Edwards Air Force Base as a test pilot. And the application process had taken a year. Everything was really delayed for a lot of reasons. And everybody knew I was one of the finalists at Edwards Air Force Base. Everybody told me that I had no chance of getting picked because I was the youngest guy by far. I was too young. I wasn't experienced enough. I wasn't good looking enough. So everybody knew. And the phone call came in. And if you got a call from the chief astronaut, you got selected. And if you got a call from the HR lady, you didn't get picked. So I get this call, and it's from Charlie Precourt, the chief astronaut. And I was in a room, we were debriefing our mission. And there was all these engineers around me, and I was talking about this F-16 sortie I'd just flown. And I turned bright red, and I was on the phone, yes, sir. And he goes, hey, Terry, are you still interested in coming down to Houston? And I was like, let me think about that. Yes. And anyway, so he said, but don't tell anybody because Congress still needs to approve it. It's secret, but you'll show up, blah, blah, blah. So yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And I hung up, and everybody was staring. There's like 10 guys staring at me. What was that? And I was like, nothing. And then about a minute later on the loudspeaker, celebration party for Captain Virts in 10 minutes or something. So that's how I found out. I went home. There was a lot of screaming and crying and excitement. That was a pretty cool day.
One of my favorite covers, one of my favorite astronauts of all of the originals is this man who was the first man in space, Alan Shepard. And one of the things you talked about is the politics of the moment in the country. And there's a story about Alan Shepard that I love. And it's that as he was sitting atop the capsule waiting to blast off, there was an open microphone, and Alan Shepard said a prayer out loud. And I have always shared this with political candidates backstage before debates. I've always said, right, in that awkward moment of silence, right, whether it's John McCain getting ready to walk out, national debate stage, whatever, I'll say, well, do you know the Alan Shepard prayer? And and invariably they go no, and I tell the story about Alan Shepard's prayer over the open mic, which was not relayed precisely to the audience by the newscasters because the prayer was, "Dear God, please don't let me fuck this up." And so when you think about the Alan Shepard prayer and you apply it to politics, and in a two-party system where one of the parties is the playground of Donald Trump, and so by necessity, the other party must oppose that, and the other party has failed in that mission to stop it, what I would say is that the Lord did not hear their prayer. To say the least. And so why do you think that in the state of Texas, which produced Lyndon Johnson and Ann Richards and Barbara Jordan, that the Democratic Party in the age of Trump, who has a 36% approval level in some polls, 40%, which also sucks in the latest one. Why in that context is this party at a 24% approval level? How do you explain that? How do you get your head around that? And why do you say, yeah, I'm with that? Which I'm with them too. I mean, I get it. So maybe the same thing is wrong with both of us. But like what? But how do you sort that out?
Yeah, that's a great question. By the way, back to Shepard's prayer, I had the same exact thought. They were asked, I get asked all the time, were you afraid? And honestly, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of screwing up because my buddies were watching and they would give me a nickname. So that was my biggest fear during my space flights. As Air Force fighter pilots, you get call signs, and it's usually based on something you screwed up. So I didn't want to do it.
What was your call sign?
I was Flanders, like Homer's. My first flying call sign was Caveman, and I was probably a lot more of a Homer Simpson kind of guy, but they call me Flanders, which is Homer's Christian neighbor. So,
okay.
It was, yeah. Anyway, there's a whole story there. So, like I said before, you go to war with the army you have. And the army we have, you're either on Team Trump or you're a Democrat. I mean, you could be an independent. You're not going to win a statewide election in Texas in 2026. The primary is in 215 days. So we are on the clock. And the Democratic Party, traditionally, I know you're a historian. I'm a JFK Democrat. We choose to go to the moon and do the harder things. It's the party of the working people. And both my grandfathers were union men. They talked about it their whole lives. Both my parents were in unions briefly. My cousin is a longtime union person, builds drones for the Navy, for Northrop Grumman. So my family is a union family, and that traditionally the Democratic Party has been the party of the working class. Unfortunately, in recent years, it has devolved into kind of a coastal elite, college-educated, out-of-touch party. A friend of mine, Adam Frisch, he ran against Lauren Boebert in Colorado. He has a great statistic. There are 3,200 counties in America. 2,000 of them are rural, country, out in the country counties. 2,000. Bill Clinton in the 90s won 52%. Bill Clinton won a majority of rural counties. That number has been going down to where Kamala Harris won 8%. 8%, basically none. The entire middle of America has given up on the Democratic Party. And I want to help. I want to be a part of leading the party back to the people, because the policies that I'm going to have as a Democrat, I think that the Democratic Party have, actually help working Americans. They help farmers. They help mechanics. They help policemen. And we need to get the message out that we're going to be the party for them, and that Trump and the MAGA Republicans are the party of billionaires, because that's actually what they are. They lie and they say they're the party of the working people. They're not. The policies they have benefit the wealthy. And I want to bring the party back to just a middle class, none of the culture war stuff. I'm the Democrat you don't have to be afraid of. I've got a 9mm sitting right next to my bed. It's locked. It's safe. The magazine's not in the weapon, but I'm not afraid of guns. That's the kind of Democrat that America needs to get back the middle of the country. And once we do that, if we do this right, we'll be winning elections 2/3 to 1/3. But we need to have leaders that have the right message and that have the right beliefs.
The first picture of Earth is taken in 1946 from space, and the Army strapped a camera into the nose cone of a V-2 rocket and sent it up, and it's a grainy image. And in 1968, a very troubled year in the history of the country, NASA makes a decision to expedite the launch of the Apollo spacecraft that will, for the first time, circumnavigate the moon. And this spacecraft, Apollo 8, goes around the moon, and coming around the side, there is a legitimate, fair to say, national broadcast, but really it's an earth-wide broadcast. And in this grainy black and white imagery coming from the spacecraft is the 3 astronauts, and they read from the book of Genesis, and they take and show the world the first image of the Earth. And that photograph is this, and it was taken by Bill Anders, who passed away, I think, this past year. And this picture of the Earth is the first time the planet is seen set as a sphere against the blackness of space by human eyes. And this takes place in 1968 at the edge of the transition from one year to another. And again, right, a very, very difficult year. Dr. King is assassinated. Robert Kennedy is assassinated. And there is a really awe in people from seeing this. And as you said, you spent a couple 100 days in space. You have spent time in that cupola. One thing that you've talked to me about is that where many people are on the Earth, 8 billion, I think, is the number. You were one of a handful of people who were above the Earth on the space station, flying over it, seeing a sunrise, seeing a sunset, every, what is it, hour, every however.
Hour and a half.
Yeah, every hour and a half. And I just, what is your takeaway from that experience? Right? What is your takeaway from all that?
Yeah, I made a video yesterday about this. When you see Earth from space, when you see the galaxy, when you see the universe, it's hard to get too impressed with celebrities or with politicians that think highly of themselves. You're like, man, right now there's a sunrise happening somewhere on this planet. And so it gives you a perspective that we're on this spaceship Earth together, flying through the universe. my crewmate, Samantha Cristoforetti, an Italian astronaut, I think put it best. She said, we all need to be crewmates on Spaceship Earth and not just passengers. So we should work together. But the other thing is it showed me the importance of having systems that work for people. When you look at Earth during the daytime, you can't see people. And if you know what you're looking at, if you're looking at London or New York and you squint at it, you can see the concrete cities, but you don't really see people during the daytime. You see people at nighttime in city lights. And I think everybody has seen, these astronauts from the space station images of city lights. I thought about it for a few days and I realized that what I was looking at is not population. What you're looking at really is wealth. And really what you're looking at is corruption or lack of corruption, or a political system that works or one that isn't. Because in places like Africa, especially Central Africa, there are no lights on. There's a lot of people there. There's 1 billion people in Africa. There's no lights on. Of course, most of those governments are terribly corrupt. North Korea, South Korea is the most visible one. South Korea is this bright, vibrant, very modern economy. North Korea is just a black hole with a little white dot where Pyongyang is. So I never expected to see politics from space, but after I thought about it for a while, I realized that's exactly what I'm doing. And so in America, we need to realize let's have a system that is not corrupt, which of course this administration is the most corrupt administration in America history. They put Rockefeller and JP Morgan in the 1800s to shame. We need to get back to systems that work for people, growing the middle class. Really, those city lights are a function of middle class. Like that means that most of the people in that region have some basic level of wealth. I didn't expect that I'd see that from space. It's a lot more fun to talk about the beautiful oceans and mountains and rivers and the galaxy and the aurora. The video I did yesterday on my YouTube was about seeing the aurora from space. But that's a perspective that's pretty unique. I mean, there's only been a handful of politicians, John Glenn and Mark Kelly, and Harrison Schmidt was a senator for one term, who have had that perspective.
And Harrison Schmidt walked on the moon, right?
He did. He was originally, it was all fighter pilots back in the 60s, and he was like one of the first scientist astronauts. So he was a geologist. They actually made those guys go through pilot training. So they started hiring scientists, but they made him go through Air Force, fighter jet pilot training, which is pretty cool. But he's a good guy. I like Jack Schmidt a lot.
There is a crater out in Arizona that I have been to where they made the astronauts train for that mission in geology class to approximate that. What I would say in response to what you just said, I'm processing it. It's incredibly powerful and it's deeply wise. And I can't help but make the comparison to what a man named Avner Less said. And he was a German Jew who became an Israeli policeman and was the man who interrogated Adolf Eichmann for 275 hours. And 20 years after Eichmann is hung, Les is asked, did you have any takeaways from the experience? And he says, it gave me my faith in democracy, because there are Adolf Eichmanns everywhere. They're all around us, but in democracy, they're perfectly harmless. They turn deadly in an instant in a dictatorship of the left and a dictatorship of the right. And really coming to that conclusion in the broader context about how there is no escaping politics, even from space, is a really remarkable thing. And I know you were in space with Russian astronauts, and I know you were up there when the war in Ukraine had started. Were you ever able to see explosions from space of Russia's aggression playing out on Earth?
Yeah, absolutely. I was there in 2014 and 2015 when they first invaded Crimea. They first invaded the Donbass. And I was there one night in the Russian segment with a guy named Sasha Samokuchayev. Excuse me. I had this chronic cough. I've had it since I was in space. It comes and goes. Um, and we were sitting there floating, looking out. They have this big giant window in the Russian segment, which is pretty cool. And as you go over Western Europe, there's a lot of lights. The farther east you go, there's less lights because obviously Eastern Europe is not as wealthy as Western Europe. And all of a sudden, you could see these red flashes on the ground. And it was like, oh my God, I can't believe what we're watching. We didn't say anything. Both of us, our eyes got big and we just watched these bombs. We were watching Russians kill Ukrainians a decade ago. And we didn't say anything. It was a very profound moment. And when we got back to Earth, Sasha and also a lady named Yelena Surova that I was with in space, and another guy named Max Sarayev, who I was also with in space on my first space shuttle mission. And also some other cosmonauts, but those three that I flew with, they went and joined Putin's political party, joined the Duma, which is the Russian Congress, and are promoting the war. And it's the most profoundly angering thing I've ever experienced because they know better. They lived in the West. They speak English. They know that America doesn't care about Russia. And there's all this propaganda there that we're out to get Russia, that the West is against them or whatever. The reality is we don't care about them. Just please don't invade Europe and kill your neighbors. And yet, so they know better and they still are promoting these lies. It's like my opponent, John Cornyn. John Cornyn knows better. He knows that Pete Hegseth shouldn't be Secretary of Defense. He knows that Tulsi Gabbard and Kristi Noem and all the rest of them shouldn't be. Who's the latest guy? Joe Kent. These guys shouldn't be in office. He knows that the big bill is going to hurt Texans, and yet he still does the wrong thing because he wants political power. These cosmonauts know better. They do the wrong thing because they want apartments in Moscow and jobs for their kids. So that's something I don't have tolerance for. People who don't do the right thing. And like I said, you could see that in a certain extent from space in terms of city lights or lack of city lights. I'm going to talk about ice. We'll probably get to ice in a little bit. But yeah, the Russian cosmonauts, there are a few good ones. There's very few good ones. Most of them are just on Team Putin, actively promoting it. We just launched a Russian Air Force officer who's, promoting Putin in the war, launching them on our spaceships. We shouldn't be doing that. I think it's immoral.
When you think about this moment that we're dealing with in the country as an Air Force Academy graduate, as an Air Force colonel, as a first-time political candidate in Texas, one of the astonishingly issues in the race are what I view as a masked secret police force that is out of control and running loose. How do you see that issue?
So I spent over a decade of my life traveling to Russia. I was training there to launch into space, learn the language, met the people. In 2012, I was there for training. And I was in Moscow walking around sightseeing by myself, and all of a sudden there was a big mob. So of course I went and looked. And it was Alexei Navalny. This was when Putin he left the president per the Constitution, and then he violated the Constitution and came back. And the Russians at that time were out protesting. And there was this kind of army dressed up like Navy SEALs. They had masks on, and they came out, and I left, and they dispersed the crowd. So the Russians have this. It's called MCHIS. They had different ones. And now in America, Steve, we have the same thing. Guys who are these are not the Navy SEALs. These are not Green Berets. These are kind of the bottom of the barrel. You've talked about this before. Wearing masks. Who wears a mask besides Batman? I mean, this is America. One of the first laws I'm going to vote for is to outlaw masks. If you're a police officer, show your face and wear your badge prominently displayed. And here's the problem in Russia. They've had so much propaganda. There's so many thousands or millions of men really that have served in these secret police organizations. Even when Putin's gone, it's going to be hard to get rid of that culture. And we're doing the same thing here in America. We're exploding ICE. The budget for ICE is just going through the roof. And we're going to have all of these people who are trained to be cruel, who are trained to be, plain clothes, grab people off the street, throw them in unmarked cars. And so I worry about the future of our country now that we have this big group of people who are frankly being trained to do evil. So that's something I haven't heard anyone else talk about that, but I worry about the implications of all of these people throughout our government who, by the way, let's talk about that. If you have a serious job in the government, if you're a top executive, you got your job by lying. You had to pass this loyalty test. And as part of that loyalty test, my friends went through it. They had to say Donald Trump won the 2020 election. So every senior government leader we had literally got their job by lying. And now we have ICE, which is the secret police. Getting rid of that and changing our culture back to a truly American culture, that's going to be one of many challenges that the next, hopefully, Democratic president has.
One of the issues that we were talking about before, and I thought this was really incredible when you said this, because I deeply believe this is true. And what you said is that the job of being a senator is about showing good judgment.
Uh-huh.
Like, that's what the job is. And you make the point that you have all these Democratic senators who voted for Kristi Noem and all these other unfit people. And incredibly, right, you have national party leaders, right, that try to pick the candidates in states that they haven't won their party hasn't won an election in, like in Texas, for 30 plus years. And you told me this story real quick about Neil Armstrong, and you said, why was Neil Armstrong the first person picked to land on the moon? And I was like, he was the best pilot. And you're like, no, he has the best judgment.
Yeah.
So like, talk about the role of judgment, right, in this moment. And then I very specifically want to ask you, in that context, and about judgment, about your judgment around the accumulation of power, whether it's by big corporate interests, right, by big tech, right, by big government, federal police, ICE police, whatever it is. So if you would, just your point about judgment as the core of what a U.S. senator's job is, and the issues, right, involving the lack of judgment that we see swirling all around us.
So, yeah, Neil, there was a whole astronaut office full of great pilots. Just ask them, they'd tell you. But for the first man to land on the moon, they wanted to know, are you going to hit the abort button when you need to abort the landing? Are you going to continue down to the lunar surface when you need to continue down? And that's why they picked Neil Armstrong. They made a great choice. He was a great pilot, but he made some really tough decisions on a split second during that time. And I think when you hire a congressman, or that's what you're doing as a voter, you're hiring your leaders and your representatives. When you hire a senator, certainly when you hire a president, you're hiring them for their judgment, because they can have tax policies and healthcare policies, whatever. They'll have their whole list of programs. But what you really need them is when something comes up, when there's some unknown thing, when 9/11 happens or whatever, are they going to make the right decision? And that's what it's all about. And are they going to decide what their party wants? Are they going to represent the people, or are they going to represent some guy in Washington, D.C., some guy in Mar-a-Lago? And unfortunately, too many of our politicians do that. The only thing that matters for them is getting elected. And I've heard you say this before, I'd rather lose an election than say the wrong thing. I'd rather, do it. I'd rather tell the truth and talk straight about things than lie and grovel just to get a job. This is about telling the truth and talking straight. And we need to hire leaders who are willing to stand up, to say something that might be popular, to say something that goes against their party, but to do the right things. Because John Cornyn knows that what ICE is doing is wrong. He knows that taking construction workers and farm workers off the streets here in Houston, Texas is wrong. And yet he's still voting for it. The entire Republican Party is. Who is not in the Republican Party? Maybe Don Bacon. Is he the last one? A few years ago, there was Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney and others. They're all gone now. And so we need Democrats who will do the right thing and not grovel to their party. And we need Republicans who will do the right thing. Like, is there nobody left who's willing to serve their people? And that's I think when you talk about judgment, that's judgment. You're willing to do the right thing even when it's not popular.
What is the core economic message that you're going to go out to Texas voters with that makes you different from what they hear from Democrats in Washington?
Yeah, so this is the key, Steve. It's easy to bash and Trump this and Trump that, and we're always negative. We need to have a positive vision because people want something that's positive and not just hearing how evil the other side is all the time. We've been trying that for years. That plan by itself doesn't work. My focus is going to be on the middle class. I'm a product of the middle class. My parents were poor. They came out of that into the middle class. When I was in fourth grade, they bought a house they couldn't afford. It was a great house, but it was old. Like, I had to chop wood all summer, and then we had a wood stove in the winter for heat. But it was in a good school district. So I literally, from fourth grade on through high school, I went to really good public schools. And that's why I got into the Air Force Academy. And that's why I became an F-16 pilot. And that's why I became a test pilot, an astronaut. So I am literally the best of the American middle class. My parents came out of poverty into that, and public education allowed me to have the amazing experiences that I did. And I want to grow that. I want tax policies that are favorable for the middle class, not just billionaires. This big, beautiful bill was discussing biggest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in our history. I want healthcare that's affordable. Healthcare in America, we spend more than twice what Japan and Europe does for worse outcomes. If I want families to have healthcare that if their kid breaks an arm, they don't go bankrupt. And a lot too many families are living in that situation. I want an education system that strengthens public education. Here in Texas, they're tearing public education down with this ridiculous voucher bill that Greg Abbott promoted. And I want a democracy that works. I just saw a statistic. I'm always reading stats. 88%, basically everybody in America thinks our political system's broken. There's some things we need to do to fix that. I think term limits. I think getting money out, this crypto bill that just passed, and it had merits to it, but the crypto industry poured $200 million into politics, and all the politicians voted for it. Like, that stuff needs to stop. The worst of all is stock trading. When you serve in Congress or the Senate, you're not getting rich person salary, you're getting middle class salary, and yet too many people are coming out of Congress wealthy beyond your dreams. So that stock trading needs to stop. The Republican Party members are not voting for that. So those are the types of policies I want to support that will help the middle class.
Last question I have for you, and then I'll leave it to you to say whatever you want in closing. But first off, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Substack. At Astro Terry is my Twitter, at Astro_Terry is Instagram. Probably the best way to find me is on my website, terryvirts.com, TerryVirts. You can watch a launch video. I made a pretty cool short video filmed in a World War II, one of the original Jeeps from World War II. So it was a fun launch video to make. But they can kind of see who I am and what I'm about and why I'm running for Senate at terryvirts.com. It'd be great to interact. I'm making a lot of content, trying to talk about common sense issues and things that people want to hear about, and also calling out the MAGA party for many of the ridiculous things that they're doing.
You talked and mentioned corruption earlier as a singular issue, as an important issue. How important do you think, real top to bottom ethics reform is for the next Congress, the 120th Congress, which is hopefully has a Democratic majority, but a very different Democratic leadership in charge of it. How important is that issue as like the first issue? I mean, one of the things that happens is, you go to Washington, everybody will say to you, well, that's an important issue, Senator Virts, but that'll have to wait a little bit, right? How important do you think that ethics is and ethics reform and all of this is in terms of that suite of issues that are going to have to be dealt with?
It is at the core of what needs to happen. Steve, when I was looking at Africa and there was no lights on, it's because those countries are corrupt. Money comes in, it all goes to the leader, all the people are left in poverty. That's what corruption does. That's why there's no lights on in North Korea. And I've never seen corruption like what's happening now. We laugh about it. Anybody who works for a company has to do ethics training and email security training and all that stuff. At NASA, there was a system called Saturn. And my buddies, we laugh. Like, imagine if there was a Saturn question. You're a government contractor. Are you allowed to give hundreds of millions of dollars to the president and then have him give you contracts? Is that ethical? Like, of course it's not ethical. Of course the stuff we're seeing is ridiculous. The Trump boys are going around the world doing multi-billion-dollar deals for his golf courses and his hotels. And now those countries get favorable tariff treatment. Those countries get weapons. It's the basic conflict of interest. And we need to stop that because it's undermining our moral authority as a country. How can we yell at Ukraine for corruption when the very top of the American government is the most corrupt that we've ever had in our nation's history? Ethics reform, corruption reform is going to be, I hate to say my top priority because there's so many top priorities, but it's absolutely up there.
Anything you want to close out with?
This moment demands that we get our politics right. And if the Democrats keep on doing the same old thing, we're going to keep on getting the same old results. Here in Texas, we haven't won for 30 years. Unless we win in Texas, we're not going to have 51 senators in the U.S. Senate. And until we get to 51, all we can do is give 24-hour filibuster speeches, or all we can do is, write angrily written tweets. We have to get a majority. That means we have to win in Texas. And the question is, who do we want to put on the ballot? The primary is in 215 days. It's March 3rd. But the real question is, who do we want on the ballot next November to beat Ken Paxton or John Cornyn or whoever it is? Because until we do that, we can't fight back. And I think I'm the best candidate to put on the ballot. I think of all these other kind of typical Democratic politicians, a friend of mine works in the Paxton campaign. He's like, yeah, we could care less about these Democratic names. They're not worried at all about the typical Democratic politicians. I think they worry about me. So the question is, who do you want on the ballot next November? I think I'm the right candidate to put on that ballot to win in a year and a half.
We'll leave it there. Terry Virts, everybody, candidate for the U.S. Senate in the great state of Texas, a veteran NASA astronaut, commander of the International Space Station, Air Force colonel, test pilot. Terry Virts in the race. You can find him at terryvirts.com. Terry Virts, everybody. Terry, thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Steve. This is awesome.
You bet. I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning. I invite you to join this community where I promise to be honest, blunt, and direct about what is happening in this country. America is in crisis. Follow and subscribe to this channel and on Substack. Thank you.